So where does Kevin Lee go from here? I mean, that's a rough one, right? He had a rough fight Saturday night against Oliveira. He came out, the momentum was building for him. He had the hype train going. He had just hooked up with Faras Zahabi. They had that successful fight. Beautiful KO of Gregor Gillespie in the first round. Comes into this fight headlining it against Oliveira. Everything is supposed to be lining up for him. This is his resurgence. And he falls flat. Falls flat. What are you going to do, right? This guy's only 27 years old. We've already been talking about him for a few years now as being at the top of the division. He beats everybody except the very top guys, right? Guys like now Oliveira, but before that you were looking at guys like Dos Anjos. I know Dos Anjos moved to 170, but he was a former champ at 155, title contender at 170. Tony Ferguson, guys like that. These are the only guys basically that he loses to for the most part. He only loses to the top of the division. So here he is, 27 years old, not big enough for 170, and at 155 he's basically a gatekeeper status already, right? Tough to say, but basically that's what he is, right? Because that's what a gatekeeper is. A gatekeeper is a guy who the only people who can beat him are the very best of that division, right? We weren't sure about Oliveira going into this fight, whether or not he was one of the best of the division, but after beating Kevin Lee the way he did, I mean, you definitely have to start to talk about him. Now, 155, super stacked, super deep, right? Between Khabib, Tony, Justin Gaethje, Poirier, McGregor. I mean, super talented, super deep division. So we'll have to see where he goes from here. But Kevin Lee, I don't know. I think that interview that he had after the fight was very telling. Right? You think about it. He's sitting there, he's talking, and he's like, hey, everything was going pretty good for the most part. Then I came in after the second round. My coaches gave me some advice. I was thinking, whatever, I'm going to do my own thing. I came out and implemented my own game plan. Things went bad really quick. He caught me, and it was over with. It's like I should have just stuck to my game plan. As soon as I went away from it, I got caught, and it was over. And then, so that was one thing that was interesting. But then right after that, he goes, you may not see me for a couple years. I was like, whoa. That's something. That's something because it speaks to the mindset of a fighter. And there's nothing more important than that. There's nothing more important than a fighter's mindset. More than any other sport that you run into, the mindset of a fighter is so huge. It weighs so big on their performance. And if you're in a bad spot, if you're in a bad place mentally, it's going to be so hard to perform at the top of your game. And if you're in a good place mentally, it's going to be so hard to slip and stay down in your performance level. So that's something, because you look at it, it's like, you think about the trajectory of Kevin Lee's career, right? He was doing real good. He's this up-and-coming young fighter. All of a sudden, his head coach dies, Robert Follis, and he gets those 2 losses. It was Dos Anjos when he moved up to 170. Somebody else, I don't remember off the top of my head. Was it Neil Magny? I don't know. I don't remember. But it was 2 losses in a row. And you could just tell that he wasn't in a good place. He had just switched over after Follis died. He had just switched over and picked up that other trainer who had known him for a bunch of years. Dewey Cooper was working as his head coach. Still kept him on for his striking. Even now, but then he switched over again after talking to Joe Rogan. He decides to take his advice. Hooks up with Faras Zahabi as his head coach. Moves out there to TriStar Gym in Canada. Starts training out of there. Then he gets that first round KO of Gregor Gillespie. So you could see it was like things were lining up for him in the sense of like he was going to have this resurgence. Okay, he was on this path. He was really young. He was on this path. So much promise, so much talent. Head coach dies, slips a little bit, hooks up with another just super talented, super famous, successful head coach in Faras Zahabi, and he's going to have all of a sudden this resurgence. You could see like that was the path. That's how it was getting laid out. That was the story that was setting up to be told, so to speak. And then Saturday night comes around and he loses to Oliveira, and it's like, it wasn't really close in a sense either. I mean, don't get me wrong, he didn't go out there and get embarrassed or get blown out, but it wasn't in the sense that like he was going to have to turn it around. He was losing that fight. He was having little moments here and there where he was successful. He was getting some of his strikes off and stuff like that, but he didn't look comfortable from the opening. Oliveira came out there and immediately started applying pressure, right? Kind of reckless, not too much, but kind of like ridiculous pressure, you know what I mean? Like invading his space, starting to chase him. And Kevin Lee immediately goes on the back foot. He starts getting off some strikes here and there, some 1-2s, some right hands. But ultimately, Oliveira was backing him up. He was getting the better of the exchanges. He was doing really good in the scrambles, threatening with some strong submissions, with some leg locks and stuff. Second round, same type of thing. Kevin Lee did a little bit better, but to be honest, I gave the first 2 rounds to Oliveira anyways. Kevin Lee comes out in that third round, tries to open up a little bit, and then ends up getting caught. Game over, right? So I don't know, it's rough. It's rough. He needs to get his mind right, man. As much as that sounds, he probably needs to, play an amateur psychiatrist over here, right? At the end of the day, the sky's the limit for a guy like Kevin Lee. He can do it all. He's already proven that multiple times, and he can do it at the highest level. But for whatever reason, he comes into these fights when all of a sudden he comes up against some opposition. He ends up not coming out with the win in fights like Tony Ferguson, and now this fight last Saturday against Oliveira. But he's certainly got the talent to be able to compete at that level and be able to make it. So I don't know exactly what it is. Right? I don't know what it is that's holding him back. But it's the same thing that forced him to come out there after the fight and say something like, "You may not see me for a couple of years." He knows that he's not in a great spot. He knows that mentally he's not in the place that he needs to be to perform at the level that he's capable of performing at. Now, I don't know what it's going to take him to get there. If he figures it out, and it's an if. It's not a guaranteed. It's an if. If he figures it out, the sky's the limit. And who knows what that holds. And he's still young. He's still younger than everybody else in the division that we're talking about. Right? He's still younger than all of those guys. So he could come in there. He could take a year off or 2 years off, come back, have some fights, work into it. And there'd be some guys that would have moved on. There may be some guys who are still around. He could come in and make his name and also dominate and compete with a new generation that's coming up, right? Like, that's the age group that he's in. And he'd feel like he was around forever. And the time off, obviously, it wouldn't be miles. He would be older on his birth certificate, but it wouldn't be wear and tear because he wouldn't have been fighting. So, who knows? We'll have to wait and see. But it'll be really interesting because Kevin Lee, even with the losses, the loss on Saturday night, the man's still incredibly talented. The man still can do ultimately what he sets his mind to do. So it'll be interesting to see where he goes. He'll still be able to work with Faras Zahabi now. Got the best training the man could ask for. So we'll be really interested to see what happens. So let me know what you think in the comments. Can't wait to see what the next thing that comes out with this camp is. So stay tuned.